My name is Hannah Cole, and for most of my life, my family has thought of me as the one who never quite measured up. I'm the middle child between my older brother, Matthew, and my younger sister, Lily. Matthew has always been the golden boy, straight-A student, captain of the basketball team, full scholarship to an Ivy League university. Lily? She's the sweet, charming baby of the family, the one who can do no wrong, even when she actually does. And me? Well, I was the quiet, artsy one, the girl who doodled in her notebooks instead of taking notes, who took a year off after high school to figure things out and never quite seemed to figure them out fast enough. It's not that I was a failure in the way people imagine, no big scandals, no huge disasters. I just never ticked the boxes they thought mattered. I didn't get a flashy degree or land a job they could brag about at holiday dinners. Instead, I worked odd jobs, saved little by little, and quietly chased ideas that I rarely talked about because I'd learned early on that my family didn't take me seriously. I can't tell you how many times I sat at the dinner table listening to my parents go on and on about Matthew's latest promotion or Lily's engagement and then turned to me with a polite, "So, what have you been up to?" That question always felt less like curiosity and more like an obligation, as if they were trying to be polite before moving on to topics they actually cared about. I'd smile, say something vague about being busy, and they'd nod and change the subject. But here's the thing about being underestimated: it can either crush you or fuel you. For me, it became fuel. Quiet, steady, burning fuel. I didn't tell them that for the last few years. I'd been building something in the background, a small business I poured my entire heart into. It started as a tiny project in my apartment, just me, a laptop, and a stubborn belief that I could create something people needed. I worked late nights, skipped social events, and lived frugally so I could invest everything back into it. I didn't want to say anything until it was real. Until it was something I could point to and say, "I did this," without them dismissing it as another one of my little projects. And eventually, after years of work, it became real. More than real, it became successful. I had clients, revenue, a growing team. But still, I kept it quiet. I wasn't hiding it out of shame. I just wanted to choose the right moment to tell them. That moment came sooner than I expected. It all started when Matthew announced he was bringing his fiancée, Claire, to meet the whole family for the first time. My parents decided to host a big dinner at their house, and everyone was invited. I knew it would be the usual gathering, my parents fussing over Matthew, Lily stealing the spotlight with her stories, and me mostly listening. But I liked meeting new people, so I figured it wouldn't be too bad. When I arrived, the house was already buzzing. My mom was in the kitchen, fussing over a roast, my dad was opening wine, and Matthew was standing in the living room with his arm around a tall, poised woman with bright eyes and an easy smile. Claire looked like she had just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine, polished but warm, the kind of person who makes you feel comfortable within seconds. She greeted me with a hug and a cheerful, "You must be Hannah. Matt has told me so much about you." I smiled politely, wondering exactly what Matthew had told her. Probably that I was his artsy sister who was finding her way. It was fine. I was used to it. We all sat down for dinner, and as expected, most of the conversation revolved around Matthew and Lily. Matthew's big project at work, Lily's plans for a destination wedding with her fiancé. I chimed in here and there, but mostly I listened, sipping my wine and letting the chatter wash over me. Then, somewhere between the salad course and the main dish, Matthew's friend, who had tagged along, asked Claire how she felt about marrying into the family. She laughed and said, "Oh, they're wonderful. So accomplished. Matt's the golden child, Lily's the sweetheart, and Hannah's, well." She glanced at Matthew, as if for permission to finish the sentence. Matthew smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Hannah's our free spirit. Always trying new things, but never really sticking with them." The table chuckled politely. My cheeks burned, but I smiled anyway. I'd heard worse. Then, as if that wasn't enough, Matthew added, "She's kind of like the family's creative wanderer. You never know what she's doing next. Last time I saw her, she was making candles or something, right?" A few people laughed. Someone asked if I was still doing that candle thing. I shook my head and said, "Not exactly," but they'd already moved on to another topic. It was later in the evening, after dessert, when the moment happened. We'd all moved into the living room for coffee, and Matthew was introducing Claire to some extended relatives who had arrived late. One of them asked about everyone's jobs, and when it came to me, Matthew started to say, "Oh, Hannah? She's kind of between things right now." Before I could open my mouth to correct him, Claire looked at me curiously and said, "Wait. Hannah Cole? As in Cole and Company?" The room went silent. I blinked at her, caught off guard. Yes," I said slowly. Her eyes widened. "You're the founder? The Hannah Cole? Your company's been all over the business magazines lately. My firm just partnered with you last quarter." I could feel every pair of eyes in the room on me. My dad actually set his coffee down with a small thud. My mom's brows furrowed in confusion. Matthew's smirk faded into something closer to disbelief. "You started that company?" Lily asked, her voice somewhere between shock and awe. I nodded, suddenly aware that I was gripping my coffee cup too tightly. "Yes. About 5 years ago." Claire laughed in disbelief. "You've been sitting here letting them talk like you're just drifting around? Hannah, your company is incredible. You're a big deal in our industry." I shrugged, a little embarrassed by the attention. "I just never brought it up." You could have heard a pin drop. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. I could feel their eyes on me, and it was a strange mix of emotions: surprise, curiosity, maybe even a bit of discomfort. Matthew was the first to break the silence. "Wait, so all this time, you've been running a company? Like, a real company?" I took a slow breath. "Yes, Matt. A real company. I started it in my apartment when I was 23. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I've worked on it every single day since. We now have 22 employees, clients across the country, and a few international contracts." My mom blinked at me as if I'd just told her I'd been living on the moon. "Why didn't you tell us?" I gave a small shrug. Because anytime I tried to talk about something I was working on, it got brushed aside. I wanted to wait until it was undeniable, I guess. Something you couldn't dismiss as just another phase. Lily leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "So, you're successful. Like, actually successful." I tried not to laugh at her choice of words. "Yes, Lily. Actually successful." Claire shook her head, still smiling in amazement. I can't believe it. Hannah, your company is innovative. We've been following your growth for a while. In my office, people talk about you like you're this visionary entrepreneur who came out of nowhere. My dad cleared his throat. I think we may have underestimated you. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. My dad isn't the type to admit things like that easily. I nodded, not sure what to say. Matthew, though, still looked unsettled. He leaned back in his chair and gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, good for you. I mean, I guess it's nice you finally found something that worked out. It wasn't much, but I'd learned long ago not to expect unqualified praise from him. I just smiled politely. Thanks, Matt. The conversation shifted after that. People started asking me questions, real questions. How did I get started? What challenges had I faced? What were my plans for the future? It felt strange. For years, I'd been the quiet background character in these family gatherings, and suddenly I was at the center of attention. I wasn't sure I liked the spotlight, but there was something deeply satisfying about watching the surprise on their faces. Later, when most people had left and only close family remained, my mom approached me in the kitchen while I was helping her put away dishes. She placed a hand on my arm. Hannah, I hope you know we're proud of you. I'm sorry if we ever made you feel like you weren't enough. Her words softened something in me that I hadn't even realized was still hard. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate that. She hesitated. It's just, you were always so private about what you were doing. We didn't know how to help. I know, I said gently. And I didn't expect you to. I just needed the space to do it my way. When I stepped back into the living room, Claire was there, waiting. She pulled me aside. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think what you've done is incredible. And I also think Matthew might not have given you the credit you deserve all these years. I gave her a small smile. That's putting it mildly. She laughed softly. Well, he might have to adjust. Because from where I'm standing, you're the most interesting person in this family gathering. I didn't say it out loud, but part of me hoped she was right. A week later, the shift in my family's attitude became more obvious. I got a call from my dad, something that rarely happened unless there was a practical matter to discuss. He told me he'd read an article about my company in a business journal and wanted to understand more about how it all works. My mom sent me a text saying she had bragged about me to one of her friends at her book club. Even Lily called to ask if I could give her advice on starting an online shop she'd been thinking about. Matthew, though, he stayed quiet. We saw each other at a family brunch not long after, and while he was polite, there was a tension in the air. Almost like he didn't quite know how to reconcile the image he'd had of me with the reality standing in front of him. The turning point came when Claire invited me to a networking event her firm was hosting. It was an industry mixer for entrepreneurs, investors, and corporate partners. She said it would be good for my brand to be there, and she genuinely seemed excited to introduce me to people she knew. I was hesitant at first. I'm not a natural networker, and those kinds of events can feel overwhelming, but I agreed. When I arrived at the venue, I was surprised by how warm the reception was. Claire had clearly been talking me up to her colleagues. People came over to shake my hand, ask about my company, and even pitch collaboration ideas. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a room full of serious business people. Matthew showed up about half an hour later, looking a little out of place. I could tell he hadn't expected to see me there, let alone to see me so engaged with people who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I caught him watching me a few times from across the room, his expression unreadable. At one point, an older gentleman approached me, tall, confident, with a commanding presence. Claire introduced him as her firm's senior partner, someone highly respected in the industry. He shook my hand and said, "So you're the Hannah Cole I've been hearing about. I've been impressed by your company's growth. You've built something very rare, a business with both heart and scalability." I thanked him, feeling a mixture of pride and disbelief. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Matthew standing nearby, listening. The partner turned to him and said, "You must be Hannah's brother. You're lucky to have such a remarkable sibling." Matthew smiled stiffly. "Yes, she's done well." That night, on the drive home, Claire and Matthew gave me a ride. Claire was chatty, talking about the people we'd met, the connections I'd made. Matthew stayed mostly silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. Finally, as we were pulling up to my apartment, he said, "Look, I know I've given you a hard time in the past. Maybe I underestimated you." I opened the door and stepped out, leaning down to look at him through the open window. "Maybe you did, Matt. But it's okay. I'm used to it." He nodded, and for once, there was no smirk, no teasing, just a quiet acknowledgement. I walked into my apartment that night feeling lighter. Not because I'd proven myself to my family, but because I finally realized I didn't need their approval to know my worth. The weeks that followed that networking event were interesting. My relationship with most of my family members was shifting, but not in the same way for everyone. My parents were suddenly much more attentive. My mom started calling me regularly, sometimes under the pretense of just checking in, but inevitably steering the conversation toward my company, what new projects we were working on, whether I had hired anyone recently, what my long-term vision was. It was flattering, in a way, but also strange. For years, I couldn't get them to take an interest in my life beyond the basics, and now they wanted to hear every detail. Dad, on the other hand, seemed more reserved, but I could tell he was quietly proud. One Sunday afternoon, when I came over for lunch, I caught him showing one of my company's product videos to his neighbor in the driveway. He didn't know I was watching from the window, but the way he spoke, calm, confident, almost protective, made me smile. Lily was another story altogether. My younger sister had always been the golden one in my parents' eyes, straight A student, active in sports, engaged to her high school sweetheart. But lately, she'd been calling me for advice about launching her own online store. She was asking genuine questions, listening intently, even taking notes. I didn't mind helping her, but I could sense she was starting to see me differently, not just as her older sister, but as someone whose path she could actually learn from. And then there was Matthew. If my parents had swung from indifference to enthusiasm, Matthew seemed stuck somewhere between discomfort and denial. We didn't talk much after the event, though we saw each other at family dinners. He was polite, sometimes even complimentary, but it was the kind of politeness that felt forced. One evening, Claire called me out of the blue. Her voice was tight, almost apologetic. "I hope this isn't weird for me to ask, but did you and Matt have some kind of falling out before that networking event?" I hesitated. Not exactly. He just never really took me seriously. I guess it's been that way for a long time. She sighed. I figured. It's just, he's been acting strange lately. I think the whole thing threw him off. He's not used to you being, well, ahead of him in some way. I laughed, though it wasn't really funny. Ahead of him? I don't think life is a race, Claire. I know, she said quickly. But you know how some people are. They measure everything in comparisons. Her words stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew she was right. For as long as I could remember, Matthew had seen me as the quiet one, the dreamer, the one who couldn't quite get it together. It must have been easier for him to define himself as the sibling who had things figured out. My success, especially the kind that came with public recognition, probably disrupted that narrative. The real shift came about 2 months later. Claire had invited me to speak on a panel at a regional entrepreneurship conference. She said they were looking for founders with unique origin stories, and she thought my journey, bootstrapping a company from my living room to a nationally recognized brand, would resonate. I was nervous, but I said yes. The day of the event, the auditorium was packed with students, small business owners, and industry professionals. I sat on stage with 3 other panelists, answering questions about challenges, lessons learned, and advice for new entrepreneurs. At one point, the moderator asked about moments of doubt, times when we'd almost given up. I told the truth. There were years when I felt invisible, I said. Like I was putting everything into something that no one believed in, not even the people closest to me. But I kept going because I knew, deep down, that the work mattered. Sometimes you have to believe in yourself when no one else does. There was a murmur of agreement in the audience, and for a moment, I thought I saw Claire watching me from the front row with a small, knowing smile. After the panel, a few attendees came up to thank me. Some said they related to the feeling of being underestimated. Others just wanted to shake my hand. I was gathering my things when I noticed Matthew standing near the exit. He looked conflicted. I walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said lightly. He shifted his weight. "Claire asked me to come. Said it'd be good for me to hear you speak." I raised an eyebrow. "And was it?" His jaw tightened. "Yeah. You're good at this." It was a small thing, but for Matthew, it felt like an admission. We left the conference together with Claire, and they offered to grab coffee nearby. We found a quiet corner table at a cafe, and for the first time in years, Matthew actually asked me about my work without sounding like he was just being polite. Still, there was an undercurrent of something else. A kind of tension that hadn't gone away. A week later, I got a text from Claire, "We need to talk." "It's about Matt." When we met for lunch, she looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to cause problems, but I think you should know something. Matt's been making little comments to people about how your success is overhyped. He says you just got lucky, that it's not as impressive as people make it out to be." I felt that familiar mix of disappointment and frustration. "Of course he is." "I told him to stop," she said quickly. "I told him it's not a good look, especially when people in our circle actually admire you. But I think, part of him just can't stand that you've outshined him in something." Her honesty was refreshing, but it also stung. Because no matter how much progress we'd made, it was clear Matthew still saw me through that old lens. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I focused on my work. But the next time I saw him at a family barbecue, I made a decision. As we were standing near the grill, I turned to him and said, "Matt, can I ask you something?" He looked wary. "Sure. Why does it bother you so much that I've done well?" He froze, then gave a short laugh. "It doesn't bother me." I tilted my head. "Claire told me what you've been saying." His expression shifted, part defensiveness, part guilt. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not used to people talking about you like you're some kind of big deal." I smiled faintly. "That's your problem, Matt. Not mine." He didn't respond. But I could tell the conversation had unsettled him. That night, I thought about something I'd said on the panel, about believing in yourself when no one else does. Maybe I'd learned that lesson because of people like Matthew. And maybe, in a strange way, I should thank him for it. The next major family gathering came faster than I expected, Lily's engagement party. She'd gone all out, renting a beautifully decorated hall with fairy lights strung across the ceiling, soft music playing, and a dessert table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everyone was dressed to the nines. My parents were beaming from ear to ear, moving from table to table greeting guests. I arrived a little later than planned, partly because of traffic and partly because I needed to mentally prepare. The idea of being in the same room as Matthew after our last conversation was less than appealing. When I walked in, Lily practically skipped over to me in her gown. "You made it," she said, hugging me tightly. "I was worried you'd be stuck at work." "I wouldn't miss it," I said sincerely. And I meant it. No matter the family drama, Lily deserved my full support. I found a seat near the back at a table that was half full. I didn't mind being away from the spotlight. It gave me a chance to observe. Matthew was across the room, talking to a group of his friends. Claire caught my eye from a few feet away and gave me a small, supportive smile. The evening went smoothly at first. Lily and her fiancé, Daniel, gave a sweet speech about how they met and their plans for the future. There was laughter, clinking of glasses, and even a few teary eyes. But during dinner, things shifted. One of Lily's friends, someone I didn't know very well, came over to my table. She was holding a glass of wine and looked excited. "So you're the Hannah, right? The founder of Greenleaf Digital?" I nodded, a little taken aback. "That's me." She grinned. "I've been following your company for a while. Your last campaign was brilliant. My boss mentioned it in a meeting last week. We chatted for a few minutes, and I could feel other people at the table listening in. Compliments were never something I'd been entirely comfortable with, but I tried to accept them graciously. That's when I noticed Matthew making his way toward us. He stepped into the conversation with a forced chuckle. "Careful, if you hype her up too much, she might start thinking she's some kind of celebrity." The words were light in tone, but the implication wasn't. I smiled politely, even though I could feel a flush creeping up my neck. "Don't worry, Matthew. I know exactly who I am." He shrugged and took a sip of his drink. "I'm just saying, it's not like she invented the internet or anything. She just runs a marketing company. The table went uncomfortably quiet. The friend who'd been talking to me glanced at him, then back at me, clearly unsure what to say. Before I could respond, Claire appeared at his side, her expression tight. "Matthew," she said in a low voice, "that's enough." He looked surprised, maybe even a little embarrassed, but he didn't say anything. Claire turned to me. "Hannah, could I steal you for a minute?" We stepped away from the table and into a quieter corner near the dessert display. Claire sighed. "I'm sorry. I told him to stop making comments like that." "It's fine," I said automatically, though my chest felt heavy. "I've heard worse." "But you shouldn't have to hear it at all," she insisted. "Especially not from family." Her voice was so firm, so protective, that for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Claire had always been kind to me, but tonight, it felt like she was choosing a side. We returned to the table, and for the rest of the night, Matthew avoided me. I thought that might be the end of it. But the universe had other plans. Near the end of the evening, Daniel's father, Mr. Hayes, stood up to make a toast. He was a well-respected businessman in the community, the kind of man who carried himself with quiet authority. He thanked everyone for coming, praised Lily and Daniel, and then started talking about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who inspire you. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "Speaking of inspiration, I'd like to acknowledge someone in the room who has built something remarkable from the ground up. Hannah, your work has been nothing short of impressive. I've followed your company's growth for some time, and I think what you've achieved is extraordinary." The room erupted in polite applause. I felt my face grow warm, and I gave a small nod of thanks. Across the table, Matthew's jaw tightened. After the toast, Mr. Hayes actually came over to talk to me. He asked thoughtful questions about my business, about future plans, even about potential collaborations. At one point, he said, "You know, it's rare to meet someone who's both creative and disciplined. That combination is why you'll keep succeeding." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Matthew watching us, his expression unreadable. When Mr. Hayes left, Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "I think he just became your biggest fan." The rest of the night passed in a blur. I tried to focus on Lily's happiness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted again, this time in a way Matthew wouldn't be able to ignore. Sure enough, as we were leaving, Matthew caught up to me in the parking lot. "Congrats," he said, his voice dripping with something I couldn't quite name. "You've officially impressed the in-laws. Must feel nice." I met his gaze. "It does. Because it's not about impressing anyone, it's about doing work I'm proud of. If people notice, great. If they don't, I'll still keep going." He stared at me for a moment, then shook his head. "You've changed, Hannah." "No," I said quietly. "I've just stopped apologizing for being myself." We left it at that. But as I drove home, I realized this wasn't just about me proving something to Matthew or the rest of the family. It was about me finally owning my place in the world, without waiting for their approval. I think the moment that truly broke the last bit of tension in the room was when Daniel's fiancée leaned forward with this curious little smile and said, "So, you're the founder?" Her tone wasn't mocking, it was more a mix of surprise and genuine interest. But in that quiet dining room, it was like her words landed with a little echo. Everyone had been half expecting me to say I was just helping or working for someone, but I could tell she'd already guessed the truth. I took a sip of water, not rushing to fill the silence. Yes, I said simply. I started it from my apartment about 8 years ago. Daniel's fiancée tilted her head. That's incredible. I've been using your product for years. It's honestly changed my workflow. I can't believe I'm just now meeting you. Daniel shifted in his chair, avoiding my eyes. My parents were both frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. It was almost funny. Just minutes ago they'd been nodding along as Daniel talked about his promotion, subtly implying I should be more like him. Now, they were suddenly trying to piece together how the daughter they'd assumed was barely scraping by had built something their future daughter-in-law admired so much. I didn't know you ran it, Daniel muttered finally, his voice tight. I don't usually lead with that, I said, keeping my tone even. People tend to make assumptions when they hear certain numbers or titles. I glanced around the table. I prefer when people get to know me first. My mom cleared her throat, her usual go-to move when she didn't know what to say. Well, that's impressive, Olivia. It was the most neutral thing she could have said, but I caught the way her fingers fidgeted with her napkin. My dad, on the other hand, leaned back slightly and just studied me, as if seeing me for the first time. Daniel's fiancée laughed softly. Honestly, I think it's amazing you've kept it low-key. That's rare. The conversation eventually moved on, but the energy in the room had shifted. My parents asked me more questions than they had in years, about my work, my travels, even the people I'd collaborated with. Daniel stayed quiet, picking at his food. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me, like he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. By the end of the night, as we were leaving the restaurant, Daniel's fiancée gave me a quick hug and whispered, "For what it's worth. I think you're inspiring."